Hello chess friends and welcome to Zarov's chess channel and welcome to the TCEC Season 19 Premier Division. So finally these are the games that I've been waiting for, and these are the games that I really like to analyze the most. They're the most complex games of course, but we'll see again some theoretical improvements, some great tactical battles, and that's why I really love these games. I hope you don't mind that I'm analyzing so many of these games. As I said, this is really the best chess that we can watch these days, and again we're now in this Premier Division stage. First the second division was played, this first division, and then the best engines from the first division moved up to the Premier Division, where of course the sharks are waiting. There is this Leela C0 engine, Stockfish engine, of course. Allenstein maybe can also mess things up, and also this two fleets version, and we'll see what will happen, because in the previous CCC season 14, there was this tournament in which Leela C0, Stockfish, and NUE performed, and Leela C0 outplayed Stockfish and NUE. So we'll wait to that moment, and we'll see how everything will work for them. So far, I think 5 or 6 rounds have been played. Leela C0 is in the lead, and today I wanted to show you a really great game with the black pieces played by Leela C0 against another top engine, Ethereal. It was King's Indian basically, but it transposed into sort of a new neo-Grunfeld setup with a static center setup. First, this game was really static. Then Ethereal really tried a great tactic to create dynamics. It was really a sharp game. So I'm really looking forward to show you this game, because it's really so far the best chess game in this TCEC Season 19. So let's start now to analyze the game. So we have the round 1 and of course fight. So knight to f3 played by Ethereal, knight to f6, g3, g6, bishop to g2, and bishop to g7. So castling. So far nothing special. We have c4 and now d5. So there is this line, maybe c takes d, knight takes d, then white would have the pawn central control, but in some occasions there is this problem when you push these pawns too early, then these pawns could be also vulnerable to your attack. So here Ethereal delays the situation a little bit in the center with the move d4, and we have now c6. This is now a similar structure like in the Slav defense. Of course in the Slav you play the move e6 and you don't do the fianchetto setup, but the main idea about this move c6 is after c takes d5 and c takes d5 that the position, the pawn structure will be symmetrical. Then it's not so easy to create dynamics in these types of structures. So here b3 played by Ethereal, and we have now bishop to f5. I like this idea of Leela C0 because there is always this relation between pawns and bishops. I mentioned that many times in my videos. So when we watch the pawn structure in the center, you see white has the pawn on the dark square, so it's of course an object of black's attack. And if you play with your white, with your dark square bishop on b2, here you see then the bishop is always blocked out. So bringing out the light square bishop is a good idea for black, as you could maybe trade it off, maybe play something like bishop to e4 and then finally get rid of it, because the main strength of white setup is of course the light square bishop here, which aims here on this very nice squares. And if the position for instance opens with d takes c4, then the light square bishop could be a powerful one. So bringing the bishop on f5 is really a nice positional idea. Here by Leela C0 we have bishop to b2 and knight to e4, cementing the knight. We're waiting the move knight to d2. After knight takes maybe e4, then we could have again the opportunity to recapture with the bishop, not with the pawn, and then this bishop could defend on this diagonal against the bishop on g2, and still black will continue to play sort of a positional attack against the bishop on b2, with maybe in some occasions in the long terms maybe to push the pawn on c5, because the bishop on b2 is a little bit vulnerable to black's attack. So here there is this problem about the bishop on f5. It could be used as an object of white's attack, maybe with some knight to h4 ideas, but that's also as a long-term plan, not immediately, because after knight to h4, and if you take the bishop on f5, then black would simply cement with g takes f5 further the knight, and black would build sort of a stonewall pawn structure. If you're familiar maybe with the Dutch defense, then black could really build this compact center around the knight on e4. So knight to h4, we see this idea. Here Leela C0 doesn't want to give up the bishop immediately, but as a long-term plan it could work. So queen to c2, now the knight is hanging. Now I think white would maybe give up even the bishop pair, because then the knight could protect further the light square. So here that's why knight to d6, played by Leela c0. And here we have c takes d5. We have c takes d5. Bishop takes d5 is not a good idea because you get e4, and you don't want to have this kind of a pawn structure now, because now white has this pawn central control, so you have to take with the pawn. So knight to c3, healthy developing move, and we have knight to c6. e3, this is a necessary move, and this move knight to c6 really forced now Ethereal to fix the position around the square d4. It's of course a fixed pawn structure, but there are now these light square problems. Of course, black cannot exploit them immediately. Again, as a long-term plan, we could use the squares e4, f3, f5 again. So e3 fixes the position, but again creates further weaknesses. So here g5, very, very risky choice by Leela c0 to weaken the pawn structure in front of the king. We have knight to f3 and now bishop to f5. The idea is simple one, to get the bishop finally out of the way and get it to very, very nice diagonal on g6, and then maybe to fix the position also with the move e6, because there is one problem. I always mention that when I analyze such games, the pawn structure now in the center is a static one. It means that we should search opportunities to outposts. So we should try maybe to fix our knight theory on e5, e4 from black's perspective. From white's perspective, we should fix it maybe here on e5. But the problem for both sides is that the pawn structure is symmetrical. So it means we have here 2 pawns on the queen side and 5 pawns here on the right side. I couldn't say here on the king side because there are also these 2 centralized pawns. And the problem is now for both sides that you cannot push pawns to create dynamics in the center. Even if you manage to do it somehow with some e4 moves, or for black's perspective with some e5 moves, then you have always the risk that you get an isolated pawn in the center. So it could be a long-term weakness. So it's not easy to make something to happen immediately. So you have to maneuver your pieces. First bishop to f5, queen to e2, and now e6. Bishop to a3. The idea is a simple one. Simple threat. Bishop takes d6, queen to d6, and knight to g5. So here that's why bishop to f6. We have rook to c1 and now rook to e8. This is a very, very powerful move by Leela c0. You see now in the continuation what are the defensive and attacking strategies here by black. We have rook to d1 and now bishop to g6. The pawn structure is fixed. The bishop is fixed now on g6. Nothing is lost. No immediate weaknesses I can see here for both sides. Of course, black could cement the knight on e4, but again, I don't see clear ideas how should proceed. So in the game knight to a4, the idea is, of course, as I said, in the static center setup, so we want to play outposts on c5 or on e5 here from white's perspective. Bishop to h5, creating the spin on the queen, and now we have h3. Rook to e7. That's the move I really like now, because one of the main stages in the opening or maybe in the early stage of the middle game is to get the rook connection. But so far the rook connection is not possible because you have to move the queen somewhere in order to get the rook connection. For instance, on the 8th rank, moving the queen is not so easy here, as the queen is a little bit overloaded to the defense of the knight on d6. And there is also the problem you cannot move the queen here to a5, then the queen could be an object of white's attack again. So this idea rook to e7 is simply to get the rook on c7 and connect the rooks on the c file without moving the queen. Great idea here by Leela c0. We have bishop to b2, rook to c8, and now g4, kicking away the bishop, bishop to g6, and now finally this outpost on e5. So rook to c7, you see the importance of this maneuver of the rook, because if knight takes c6 happens, you see if we wouldn't move the rook on c7, then after knight takes c6, maybe rook takes c6 and rook takes c6, b takes c6, you risk that you get this backward pawn. That's also huge strategical disadvantage here for black, and then white would finally cement the knight on c5. So that's why rook to c7 a necessary move. So knight takes g6, h takes g6, and okay, black has lost the bishop pair, but as I mentioned before, it's not so easy to create dynamics for the bishops here. You would love to play something like after e4, but if you do that, even if you manage to do it, then you risk to get this pawn isolated on d4. So the knight is here really vulnerable to black's attack. So it's not so easy, as I said, to create some kind of a dynamic pawn structure immediately. So knight to c5, Ethereal gets his outpost. Here bishop to g7, and now bishop to f3. Queen to e8, we have queen to e2, and now a5. So a5 also very nice move, because when you have the knights on the board, you want to put the position to be compact. You're not, you don't want to allow your opponent some pawn breakthroughs, really some dynamic pawn structures. a5 a very nice blockade move, because there is also maybe this threat a3, b4, and then maybe somehow to push the pawn on b5, maybe with bishop to e2 maneuvers, and simply kicking away this knight and opening the c file. So a5 blocks this idea immediately. Here queen to e1, and now we have f5. Very nice move, because black wants, of course, to improve the pawn structure. There is this weakness, this double pawn structure. In the game, bishop to g2, we have bishop to f8, and now queen to f1. Now knight to e4. You see this knight is very well cemented now. It's protected by both of these pawns. If you try something like knight takes e4, then we could simply take f takes e4. D takes e4 is not a good option, as here after g takes f5 and maybe g takes f5, then you see f3 breaks the position. You don't have any more this symmetrical pawn structure. Now suddenly the position is perfectly fine for the bishops. As you see, we're opening the light square diagonal in this particular line. If you take here, for instance, if white would have played that knight takes e4, f takes e4, still this bishop is blocked out. Again, f3 could happen, but after e takes f3, bishop takes f3, again you cannot open the position for the bishop with some e4 moves, as the pawn on d4 is hanging. So you see, it's really hard here for Ethereal to get something out of this bishop pair, and Ethereal tried here really risky idea. G takes f5 first. We have knight takes c5 by Leela c0, and here Ethereal decides to sacrifice a piece. F takes e6. Now the game is really a wild one, because after knight takes e6, we have bishop to d5, and suddenly this bishop comes into the game. We have gained 2 pawns for the piece, but this is really a great position for white. The bishops are aiming, and the most important thing is that we have 2 connected centralized pawns. We can move them. They're mobile pawns. We can create dynamics. The bishop pair is really dangerous here. Black's pieces are only used now as defensive pieces, and the evaluation here, the stockfish evaluation, is equal, but still you have to play now perfect moves in order to defend here Ethereal's attack. It's a great attack so far. So knight to d8, protecting the knight, and we have queen to g2. So king to h7, rook takes c7. Very nice idea here by Ethereal, because Ethereal doesn't want to have here the pressure on the c file. Here first releasing the pressure after rook takes c7, and now bishop to c4. Maneuvering the bishop, very important move. We want to get this bishop to d3. And when you place these bishops like that, then the rook is basically out of game. The rook cannot come into the onto the second rank, maybe on the third rank, where it could be active. So bishop to d3, very important move here by Ethereal. So knight to f7, queen to g4, attacking the knight, knight to g7, and now finally this bishop to d3. Rook to c8, and now h4. This is really a great one. Splitting the pawn structure in front of the king, there is this serious threat. Let's see if you play something bad, like knight to h6 was played, but if you play something like bishop to d6, for instance, a dubious move, then you get h5. That's the main tactical threat you see. You cannot take with the knight, you get queen takes h5. You cannot take with the pawn because the bishop is aiming. Also, you cannot take with the pawn. Already the pin is here, so very nice attack. So after h4, knight to h6 was played, and now we have queen to g5. So Ethereal grabs another pawn. Great attack, as I said so far. Leela has to be careful here. Bishop to e7, we have queen to g2. If you try queen to g3 in order to defend this pawn, then knight to f5 will happen. Black can regroup. Black can finally cement the light squares. Has this very nice defensive setup of the knights, and will probably take also the pawn on h4. So that's why queen to g2, bishop takes h4, Leela c0 gets back a pawn, at least one. If this game would have proceeded with 3 pawns, 4 piece, that would be really, really dangerous, especially with such a powerful bishop pair here with white. So king to h1, we have bishop to d8, and now d5. You should really now move these pawns. This d5 also liberates this dark square diagonal for the bishop, and here queen to f7. Here the best defensive strategy is simply to keep the pieces glued together. You have to really be like a hedgehog here, really creating a compact position with your pieces. First, you have to defend this. You cannot counterattack immediately. Rook to g1. Now we're attacking also this g6 weakness. Knight to f5. We have e4. Knight to h4. Queen to h3. And now rook to c7. You see, the rook is useless here. As I said, you cannot bring it to the second rank. The bishop on d3 plays a very important defensive role, but of course also a very important attacking role. We have queen to e3 and now rook to e7. You see, if you try something again, bishop to e7, that's the main problem here. White can simply move this pawn somewhere. We could try something like bishop to c4, then e5. If white manages to connect both of these pawns on the 5th rank, this could be really, really dangerous. And here, if you try something like knight to f3 to attack the rook, it's okay, it's a threat, it's a simple threat, but it's not so dangerous to attack the rook now. You get crushed immediately because you get this move d6. So here, if you try to escape with rook to g3, if you again try to escape with your knight somewhere, then queen to d4 is really, really dangerous here to handle. You didn't bring your bishop into the game now. There is even this checkmate threat. We could even even if white, pardon me, black protects it somehow, we could move this pawn further. Then if we manage to connect these pawns on 6th rank, the game is over for black for sure. So here, after the move queen to e3, that's why rook to e7, we have to protect it somehow. If you try d6 immediately, that's not a good choice because we simply play rook to e8, and bishop to c4 doesn't work here because we simply can't play queen to d7. You cannot connect the rooks. If you try e5, then rook to f8, and here if you try e6, there is the problem of queen to c6. You see your king is under fire, so you have to be, as I said, active. You have to find counterattacks. Here it's really a bad position now for white, so that's why d6 is not possible immediately, but as a long-term plan, again I'm pointing out, if black makes a mistake, for instance, then d6, e5, e6, d7, e7 is a huge attacking possibility here for white. So here queen to g3, we have rook to e8, and now we have f4. So you see, this is really an annoying pawn structure to handle, really a central pawn storm that Ethereal has created. Rook to f8, and we have bishop to a3, rook to h8, and now Ethereal makes, I think, the first mistake in the game. So far, has been a great attack. Queen to h3 brings back to life now Leela c0, because a better idea is simply to play bishop to b2, and probably bishop to f6 is the best way here to proceed for black. After bishop to f6, queen to f6, and now e5, we get our pawns rolling further. It's still hard to defend this here for black. But in the game, this move queen to h3 allows now Leela c0 to get back into the game with the move knight to f5. I think this is the tactic that Ethereal has missed, because you cannot take, of course. E takes f5 is not a possibility because you get queen to d5. You could maybe go with your king to h2, but now king to g7. That's the huge tactical threat. If you try something like bishop to b2, we'll simply cover with the bishop to f6 after trades of bishops. I'm not seeing a good way how to defend this. You have to get out of the h-file, but both of your pieces are on the h-file, and the serious threat is, of course, knight to f3. So, as said, that was queen to h3. Risky choice here by Ethereal. Knight to f5 brings back now Leela c0 into the game. We have a rook to g2, and now bishop to f6, covering finally everything. Everything is now, as I said, glued together. The pieces are compact. Now what we want to do is get our king out of the h-file and create this dangerous attack with our rook. So rook to h2, we have king to g7, queen to g4, and now a4, simply trying to create further weaknesses. We have bishop to c5, and now queen to c7, attacking the bishop. the b4 cementing the bishop, and now it can be kicked away, of course, with b6. We have bishop to g1, and now knight to h6. You see these knights are coming now finally into the game. The bishop will come into the game, the rook will come into the game. We can create really the simple threats on the queen. Rook to c2, counterattack, queen to d6, not a problem. Queen to h3, and now knight to f7. Again, you see we found good square for our piece here in the game. Bishop to h2, knight to f5. Again, the same idea. If you take, we'll simply play queen takes d5. Queen to g2 was played. Knight to e3, the fork we have now on the queen and the rook. We have queen takes g6. Again, a risky choice. It seems like a good tactic with d6, but here Leela c0 simply escaped. King to g7, we have e takes d6, and now knight to c2, we have bishop to c2, and after knight to d6, king to g2. Here in this position, Ethereal resigned. We have an extra rook. We don't have any more these three connected pawns. If these pawns, if for instance white would have still an e4 pawn, this could be playable maybe with the potential e5 pawn breakthrough fork. But so without a rook, it's of course a completely a losing game here for white. So great game. I think you see how one move can really mess up your whole attack. That's why I like more to play maybe a pragmatic positional style myself. You see, when you go into tactical battles, you have to calculate basically every possible outcome, and Leela c0 defended, found really great counterattacks, and won the game. Is now in the lead, as I said, in this Premier Division of the TCEC 19. We'll see what will happen. Still many games will be played now, and I'll cover this tournament because it's really the best chess, as I said, that we can watch these days. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game as a warm-up of this TCEC season 19. If you want to see more brutal games like this, check out my other commented chess games played by computers. And if you want to see the best chess games played by humans, check out my best chess games of all time series. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.